Shortly after I got here in 1973, CROW was founded, Center for Research on Women was founded about that time. And people like Myra Strober and Diane Middlebrook and Shelley Rosaldo, who were involved in the Center for Research on Women, and Myra Strober above all, who was director of the center, had the idea, a very good idea, of pulling faculty members together to talk about research on women's studies. Stanford faculty members to talk to each other about research on women's studies. I don't know exactly whose idea it was. I think the invitation may have come from Diane or Myra or somebody. And I don't even know why I was included, except I believe there was a stage, maybe in 1974 or not later than 1975, after I'd been here a year or two, when people were thinking, instead of just looking at the small handful of us who've done any published work on women's studies, we ought to reach out to other faculty members who might be interested, young faculty members, women here at Stanford particularly, who might be interested in what we're doing. And they included me. And so I started going to these discussion groups, and I found them totally fascinating. I'd never thought about some of these issues. And it made me think for the first time how thinking seriously about women might fundamentally transform my own field. It would be like a total earthquake. And I had never thought of that before. So it was a very powerful intellectual experience. And hearing other women go through the same thought process and say, wait, if we thought about women in history, what would we write about that we've never written about before? Or women in biology? And we were sharing that sense. And that was really exciting. And that was true for a couple of years. And then we thought about forming a program for studying, for putting together what we were doing in a formal disciplinary program. And we argued about whether to call it women's studies or feminist studies. And that was also an exhilarating and challenging moment. But the group of people who'd been pulled together by CROW and who turned then to form feminist studies became my closest friends here by far and my real sisterhood intellectually. And I wound up spending more and more time with them and less time in the department. Not that I was falling down at my job. I was still teaching, but I didn't get as involved in department affairs. I was deeply involved in CROW and feminist studies. And it started when somebody just sent out an invitation to a few of us saying, hope you might come to this monthly discussion group where we talk about research on women. And partly because of Wellesley and St. Anne's and partly because of what had happened at the end at Swarthmore, I was receptive because I thought, and partly because of Yale, God knows, there are reasons to have issues here, and I'd be interested to talk about it, even though it was nothing to do with my research at that point. Mm-hmm. So they somehow sensed I would be receptive. And so I came and got totally drawn in.
So would you say this was somewhat of a epiphany or turning point for you?
Absolutely.
Because you thought about how being a woman impacted your personal life in these institutions.
But never professionally.
But now you're thinking about research and how thinking about women would change research. Is that the difference?
That's right. Epiphany is not too strong a word. It was a real turning point, I think, for every one of us. Mm-hmm. And after it, here I was still working on the book in France, still very dedicated to it, but there were no women in that book, and I became more and more conscious of that. So in the end, as I published it, as I sent it to the publisher in 1979, I wrote a preface in which I dedicated to my mother for this, with the tribute to all she did and all how smart and thoughtful she was, but she never had a chance to write her own book. Mm-hmm. And so I was only aware at the very end of the anomaly that here I was getting passionately involved in thinking about research on women. I was writing a book in which there was not a woman to be seen.